The stagecoach smelled of wet wool and old tobacco. Maybelle Dawson, who now called herself Miss Dawson, kept her face turned to the cracked leather curtain, pretending the gray, weeping sky of Wyoming was of any interest. Every jolt of the wagon wheels sent a sharp pain through her empty stomach. She had 30 cents left in her pocket, folded into a piece of newspaper. It was not enough for another meal, and certainly not enough for a room. It was enough, perhaps, for a bullet, if the man at the mercantile told her the housekeeping job was already taken. She had been traveling for 3 weeks, moving north, moving away. She had left Kansas with nothing but the clothes on her back, a thin carpet bag, and a name that was not her own. She had scrubbed floors in one town for a week's lodging and served sour beer in another for stagecoach fare. Now, she was at the end of the line, in a town that was little more than a muddy track between 2 rows of false-fronted buildings. The coach lurched to a halt. The driver, a man who had not spoken more than 5 words the entire journey, bellowed, "Last stop, end of the line." Maybelle pulled her shawl tighter. It was thin, and the spring evening was freezing. The wind had a bite that promised more snow, not thaw. She stepped down into mud that sucked at her worn boots, pulling her bag with her. She was hungry, she was exhausted, and she was desperate. The air smelled of pine smoke and damp earth. She looked at the sign, Gentry's Mercantile. This was the place. She pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead, a sharp, cheerful sound that felt like a mockery. The air inside was warm and thick with the competing smells of kerosene, dried apples, coffee beans, and new denim. A woman stood behind the counter, counting ledger lines with a sharp pencil. She looked up, her eyes magnified by wire-rimmed spectacles. She was thin, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to hurt. "Can I help you?" Her voice was as sharp as her pencil. "I'm here about the advertisement," Maybelle said, her voice sounding reedy and weak to her own ears. "For the housekeeping position, at the Morgan Ranch." The woman looked Maybelle up and down. It was a slow, deliberate inspection, taking in the cheap, mud-stained hem of her dress, the thinness of her face, and the hands clenched tightly around her bag. "You're Miss Dawson." It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "I am Agnes Plemon. Cole Morgan is my brother." She did not offer a hand. She tapped the pencil against the ledger. "The advertisement was posted 6 weeks ago. You are the first to inquire. That should tell you something about the location." "I'm not afraid of isolation, ma'am." "We'll see." Agnes squinted. "You look half-starved. And you are young. Too young, perhaps. The advertisement was for a respectable widow." Maybelle felt the blood drain from her face, but she held the woman's gaze. This was the lie she had practiced. "My husband passed consumption back in Missouri." "And left you with what, precisely?" Agnes gestured to Maybelle's single, small bag. "Not much, it seems. He left me with a willingness to work hard. Ma'am, I can cook, I can clean, and I can mend. I am not afraid of labor." Agnes snorted, a small, indelicate sound. She looked at Maybelle's hands. They were chapped and red from travel, but they were not the thick, calloused hands of a lifelong laborer. They were a singer's hands, a card dealer's hands. "My brother has 2 small children," Agnes said, her voice lowering, as if imparting a grave warning. "They lost their mother 3 winters ago. They do not need complications. They do not need a flighty woman who will run off when the work gets hard or the winter gets long." "I won't run off." The desperation in her own voice shamed her. "I have nowhere to run to. I just need the position." Agnes studied her for another long moment. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of a large clock on the wall. Maybelle could feel the small coins in her pocket, a cold weight against her leg. She could feel the memory of smoke and cheap perfume rising in her throat. Finally, Agnes sighed. "Cole is loading the wagon. He makes the final decision. But I am telling you now, Miss Dawson, I do not believe you are what you say you are. But he is a soft-hearted fool, and he is my brother. Wait by the door." Maybelle moved away from the counter, her legs trembling with relief and humiliation. She stood by the window, watching the gray light fade from the sky. 10 minutes later, the bell jingled again. Cole Morgan entered, and he seemed to bring the cold wind in with him, though his presence was anything but cold. He was a broad-shouldered man, tall and solid, with a thick brown beard threaded with lighter strands. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a hat pulled low. He stopped when he saw Maybelle, pulling off his gloves. "This is Miss Dawson," Agnes announced from the counter. "She's come for the job." Cole Morgan looked at his sister, then at Maybelle. His eyes were the warmest thing she had seen since arriving in Wyoming. They were a clear, deep hazel, and they were filled with a profound, settled tiredness. He nodded. "Ma'am." His voice was a low rumble. He looked her over, but his gaze was not the violation Agnes's had been. He was not measuring her worth. He was just seeing her. He saw the exhaustion. He saw the thinness of her shawl. He sensed, perhaps, the brittle thing inside her, the part that was ready to shatter. "Agnes, did you add the flour to the order?" he asked, turning away. "Of course I did. Are you hiring her? Or is she to freeze in the street?" Cole ignored his sister's tone. He picked up a heavy sack of grain as if it were feathers. "Wagons out front. Miss Dawson, the ride is about an hour. We best get moving before the snow starts in earnest." He gave her no chance to reply, just walked out. Maybelle looked at Agnes, who merely raised an eyebrow and returned to her ledger. Maybelle picked up her bag and hurried out, back into the biting cold. The wagon ride was silent. Cole Morgan handled the team of draft horses with an easy, confident hand. The promised snow had begun, small, hard flakes that stung her face. The ranch was, as Agnes had warned, remote. They left the small town and followed a track that wound up into the hills, the landscape vast and empty, the mountains looming like dark giants in the twilight. When they finally crested a long ridge, Maybelle saw it. The ranch house was nestled in a small valley, protected by a stand of tall pines. It was a solid log structure, modest, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, dark and large. It looked lonely. It looked secure. As they pulled up, the front door opened, spilling yellow lamplight onto the snow-dusted porch. 2 small figures appeared. "Papa!" A little boy, no more than 5, launched himself from the porch and ran toward the wagon, heedless of the cold. "Jacob, you get back inside without a coat." Cole's voice was stern, but it was thick with affection. The boy ignored him, skidding to a halt by the wagon wheel and staring up at Maybelle. He was sturdy, with a mop of unruly dark hair and his father's warm eyes. "Who's that?" "This is Miss Dawson. Jacob. She's going to be helping around the house." Cole climbed down and lifted the boy effortlessly, settling him on his hip. A second child, a girl, hung back in the doorway. She was older, perhaps 8, and held a cloth doll by one arm. She was pale and quiet, her dark hair in 2 neat braids. "Emma, this is Miss Dawson." The girl, Emma, just watched. She did not smile. She did not move. "Get inside, both of you. It's freezing." Cole led the way, carrying Jacob. "Miss Dawson, welcome to the ranch." Maybelle stepped inside. The main room was warm, dominated by a large stone fireplace where a healthy fire crackled. It was clean but sparse, a long wooden table with benches, a few mismatched chairs, and a worn sofa. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and faintly of soap. It was a house of men. "Your room is this way," Cole said, nodding down a short hall. "It's small, but it's warm." He paused, shifting Jacob on his hip. The boy was now studying Maybelle with an open curiosity. "Agnes will be out in a day or two to settle you in for tonight. Just rest. Supper is in the pot on the stove. Jacob, Emma, show Miss Dawson where to wash up." He left her then, heading back outside to tend to the horses, his heavy boots echoing on the porch. Jacob grabbed her hand. His own was small and surprisingly warm. "Come on, Papa made stew. It's got carrots." Emma simply vanished back into the shadows of the room. Maybelle let the little boy pull her toward the kitchen pump, her mind numb. She had a job. She had a roof. For tonight, she was safe. She kept her emotional distance, a wall she had been building for 2 years. She was Miss Dawson, the housekeeper. That was all. The work began the next morning. It was relentless. Agnes arrived as threatened, and for 2 days, she instructed Maybelle with military precision. The wood-fired stove was a fickle beast. The laundry required boiling water hauled from the outside pump, and the bread dough refused to rise in the cold kitchen. Maybelle's hands, soft from her previous life, were raw and bleeding by the end of the second day. She was clumsy with the heavy cast-iron pans and awkward with the mending. But she did not complain, and she did not stop. Cole Morgan watched her. He would sit at the table long after breakfast was over, nursing a cup of coffee, just watching. He saw her struggle to lift the heavy water buckets, her thin arms trembling. He saw the frustration in her face when the biscuits burned. He also saw that she got up before dawn, long before he did, to get the fire going so the house would be warm for the children. He saw her determination, a grit that surprised him. He began to help in small ways, leaving a full kindling box by the stove each morning, or quietly moving the heavy flour sack to a lower shelf where she could reach it. They rarely spoke. Theirs was a world of shared labor, not words. But the children did not understand distance. Jacob, the 5-year-old, was a whirlwind of mud, questions, and mischief. He followed her everywhere, chattering about the new calf, his favorite horse, and the monster that lived in the barn's hayloft. Maybelle found herself responding in monosyllables. Yet she also found herself patching the knee of his overalls with extra care and gently wiping mud from his face. Emma, at 8, was the quiet one. She was a small, pale ghost who drifted in and out of rooms. She watched Maybelle with a silent, unnerving intensity. For the first week, she did not speak a single word directly to her. Then, one afternoon, Maybelle was sitting by the fire, darning Cole's heavy work socks, her fingers stiff and sore. Emma approached and quietly sat on the floor nearby, watching the needle flash. "Your stitches are crooked," Emma said. Her voice was small and clear. Maybelle stopped, startled. "Yes, I suppose they are. Ma's were perfect." Maybelle's hand tightened on the sock. "I'm sure they were." Emma considered this. She reached out a small finger and touched a patch of rough darning. "It will hold, though. It's strong." She then got up and left the room, leaving Maybelle staring into the fire. The brief, wordless moments of intimacy began to stack up, like kindling for a fire Maybelle wanted desperately to keep unlit. One morning, at the crowded breakfast table, she reached for the salt pot at the same time as Cole. His large, calloused hand brushed hers. It was simple, accidental, but a jolt went through her, sharp and sudden as static. She pulled her hand back as if burned. He did the same. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, his surprised, hers frightened. She looked down at her plate, her heart hammering. Another time. He came in from the cold, stamping snow from his boots. She had a pot of coffee brewing, and without thinking, she poured him a cup and handed it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers on the warm tin. He smiled, a small, quiet smile that barely touched his beard but lit his tired eyes. "Thank you, Miss Dawson." "You're welcome, Mr. Morgan." It was nothing. It was everything. She retreated further, scrubbing the floors with a renewed, punishing vigor. Then the storm hit. The harsh late-winter blizzard swept down from the mountains without warning. Cole and his hired hand, a quiet man named Silas, barely got the herd moved into the sheltered valley before the world dissolved into a howling whiteness. For 4 days, the wind screamed. The snow piled up against the windows, higher than a man's head, plunging the house into a dim, gray twilight. They were trapped. Cole, Maybelle, Emma, and Jacob. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the ranch house. The constant, shrieking wind frayed their nerves. Jacob was bored and loud. Emma was paler and quieter than ever. Cole paced, restless, worried about his cattle. Maybelle cooked and cleaned, the relentless domestic tasks keeping the panic at bay. The isolation was suffocating. She felt Cole's presence in the small space acutely. He was always there, oiling tack by the fire, reading to Emma, or just watching the snow swirl outside the one clear pane of glass. She felt his gaze on her as she kneaded dough, her back to him. On the 3rd evening of the storm, the tension was thick as felt. They were eating supper, a thin stew made from the last of the vegetables. Jacob was cranky, pushing his carrots around his bowl. "Eat your food, Jacob," Cole said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Don't want it." Jacob dropped his spoon, and it clattered loudly on the wooden floor. Maybelle, sitting opposite him, bent to retrieve it. She wiped it on her apron and handed it back to him, her movements automatic. "Thank you, Ma," Jacob mumbled, his voice sleepy and thick. The world stopped. The only sound was the howling of the wind outside. Maybelle froze. Her hand, having released the spoon, remained suspended in the air. Cole stopped chewing. His head came up, his eyes locking on her. Emma's wide. Watching eyes darted from her father to Maybelle. Maybelle's face went white. It was not a blush of embarrassment. It was the bloodless pallor of sheer terror. She could not breathe. The walls of the cabin seemed to rush in, the smell of the stew suddenly suffocating. "I am not," she whispered. She could not finish. She pushed back from the bench so abruptly it scraped loudly on the floor. She stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "Miss Dawson," Cole started, his voice low. "Excuse me?" Her voice was a choked rasp. She turned and walked, stiff-backed, to the small kitchen alcove, turning her back on them all. She gripped the edge of the dry sink, her knuckles white, staring at the dark, frosted window. Cole watched her for a long moment. He looked at his son. "Jacob," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Her name is Miss Dawson. You know that." "But," Jacob's face crumpled, confused by the sudden, violent tension. "She gave me the spoon." "Eat your supper, son." Later that night, the storm had quieted to a low, mournful moan. The children were long asleep in their shared room. Maybelle had not come out of her own small room since the incident at supper. Cole assumed she had gone to bed. He sat by the fire, the flames low, poking at the embers. He felt the weight of the last 3 years, the weight of raising his children alone, the weight of this endless winter. He heard a floorboard creak. Maybelle was standing by the hall entrance, wrapped in her thin shawl. She was just a silhouette against the darkness. He thought she was heading to the kitchen for water. "He didn't mean it, you know," Cole said quietly to the fire. "He's 5 years old. He misses his mother. Sometimes the name just slips out." She did not move. When she spoke, her voice was brittle, like ice. "He shouldn't say it, ever." The vehemence in her tone made him turn. He could see her face now, pale in the dying firelight, her eyes wide and haunted. "Miss Dawson, I am not asking you to be his mother. I am only asking you to understand he's a child." "You don't understand." She took a step back, her hand finding the door latch. "Then tell me." He kept his voice gentle. the way he would soothe a spooked horse. He stood up slowly. It was just a word. Why does it frighten you so much? His kindness was worse than Agnes's suspicion. It was a threat. It demanded a truth she could not give. The small, warm cabin felt like a trap, the air too thick to breathe. I can't. The words tore from her. I can't be a mother. She yanked the door open. Maybelle, wait! He called her by her first name without thinking. It's freezing. The snow is deep. I need air. She fled. She plunged off the porch into the deep, powdery snow, disappearing into the blue-white darkness of the storm's aftermath. She did not go far. She couldn't. The snow was waist-deep near the barn, and the cold was a physical blow. Stealing her breath, she pushed her way to the lee side of the barn, sheltered from the wind, and collapsed against the rough, frozen logs. She sank into the snowdrift, the cold seeping instantly through her dress and shawl. She welcomed it, the burning cold in her lungs, the numbness creeping into her feet. It was real. It was a punishment she understood. Her hands were shaking, not just from the cold. She fumbled in the deep pocket of her apron, her fingers numb and clumsy. They closed around the one thing she had carried from Kansas, the one thing she had run back into the fire for. She pulled it out, a small, silver locket. It was heavy in her palm. The front was engraved with a vine, but the back was blackened, warped. The metal bubbled from intense heat. She didn't need the moonlight to see it. She knew it by heart. Her thumb found the catch. It sprang open. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, perfect lock of pale blonde hair, sealed beneath glass. On the other side, there was nothing but a blackened, charred smear. The miniature portrait of her baby, of Lily, had been burned away. All that was left was the smoke. Maybelle Dawson doubled over in the snow, clutching the locket to her chest. The sobs ripped through her, but she made no sound. They were silent, violent heavings that shook her entire frame, stealing the air from her lungs. Tears streamed down her face, freezing instantly on her cheeks. She was not Miss Dawson, the respectable widow. She was Maybelle, the saloon singer, the woman who had left her baby to die, and she could not, would not, ever be a mother again. Cole Morgan found her an hour later, huddled against the barn. He had followed her tracks, his heart a cold knot of dread in his chest. He brought a heavy bison hide, the one he kept by the door. He did not speak. He simply wrapped it around her, his movements economical and sure, and pulled her to her feet. Her body was rigid, her face slick with frozen tears. He guided her back inside, the snow crunching under his heavy boots. He sat her by the fire and pushed a mug of hot, sweetened coffee into her numb hands, closing her fingers around it. "You'll catch your death," he said, his voice rough. She said nothing. She just stared into the flames, her body racked with silent, shivering tremors. He stood for a long time, watching her, before he finally turned and went to his own cold bed. The blizzard raged for another 5 days. The world was reduced to the gray, howling space between the house and the barn. The snowdrifts climbed the walls, turning noon into a dim, undersea twilight. The wind moaned in the chimney, a constant, mournful sound that frayed the nerves and shortened tempers. On the 4th day, Jacob woke with a rattling cough and a fever that burned bright in his cheeks. By evening, he was delirious. He thrashed in his small bed, his breathing shallow, crying out for water, then pushing it away. Emma sat in the corner of the room, her small face pinched and white, clutching her doll. Cole was a large, helpless shadow, his movements clumsy with fear. He bathed his son's face with a cloth, but the fever only seemed to climb. "He's hot," Cole muttered, his voice raw. "He's too hot." He looked at Maybelle, who stood frozen in the doorway. He looked at her as if he had forgotten she was there. "His mother, Sarah, she—" He stopped. He couldn't finish. Maybelle looked at the small, flushed boy. She looked at the terrified father. Something inside her, a mechanism frozen for 2 years, clicked and broke free. This was not about her. This was not about shame, or names, or the past. This was a child, burning with fever. She moved. Her hesitation vanished, replaced by a swift, quiet competence that startled even herself. "Get more water," she ordered Cole, her voice low and steady. "Melt snow on the stove. Keep it boiling. And I need clean rags. All of them." He stared at her, then nodded and moved, grateful to be commanded. Maybelle sat on the edge of the small bed. "Jacob," she whispered. He did not respond, just mumbled and turned his head. She dipped a cloth in the basin of cool water Cole had left, wrung it out, and gently laid it across the boy's forehead. He sighed, a small, pained sound. For 2 nights and 2 days, she did not leave his side. She moved with an instinct she thought had been burned out of her. She coaxed spoonfuls of willow bark tea between his chapped lips. When he shivered with chills, she piled blankets on him. When the fever raged, she stripped them away and bathed his small, hot body with cool water, her touch gentle but firm. She held his hand when he cried. She changed his sweat-soaked bedding without complaint. Cole watched her. He brought her coffee, which she drank without tasting. He brought her broth, which she spooned into Jacob first. He saw her hands, raw from the lye soap and harsh chores, moving with a tenderness that was almost painful to witness. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion pulling at her face, but she did not falter. She was a bulwark against the fever. On the 3rd morning of the illness, the 7th day of the storm, the blizzard finally broke, the wind died, and a weak, watery sunlight filtered through the snow-caked windows, and Jacob's fever broke with it. Maybelle had fallen asleep sitting up, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her hand still loosely holding his. She woke when Jacob stirred and spoke, his voice weak but clear. "I'm thirsty." Her head snapped up. His eyes were open. They were clear. The flush was gone, leaving him pale but blessedly cool. "Papa," he whispered. Cole was across the room in 2 strides, his hand on his son's forehead. He closed his eyes, his broad shoulders slumping in a wave of profound relief. He looked at Maybelle. Her face was streaked with soot and weariness, her hair falling from its pins. He said nothing, but his eyes, those warm hazel eyes, were full of a gratitude so deep it was almost an apology. Later that evening, the children were asleep. Jacob was resting peacefully. Emma, her own tension broken, slept beside him. Maybelle was scrubbing the stew pot in the kitchen, her body aching with a strange combination of bone-deep weariness and a fragile, unfamiliar lightness. Cole came to stand near the stove, warming his hands. The silence stretched, but it was different now. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the quiet of shared trial. "I never thanked you," he said, his voice low. "He's a good boy. He's strong." She kept her back to him, scrubbing a spot that was already clean. "Sarah, my wife," he began, and she froze, her hands sinking into the greasy water. "She died 3 winters ago, right after Jacob was born. It was pneumonia. It came on fast, so fast." He spoke to the stove, his gaze fixed on the glowing embers visible through the grate. "She was from back east. She hated it here. She hated the wind, the emptiness. She was delicate. This land was too hard for her. When she got sick, it was like she just gave up. Let the cold take her." He paused, and Maybelle could hear the tightness in his throat. "I was angry for a long time. Angry at her for leaving. Angry at this place for taking her. Angry at God." He picked up a piece of kindling, testing its weight in his hand. "When Jacob got sick, I saw her face. I saw her giving up. I thought—" He set the wood down. "But you did not give up." He looked at her, his gaze direct and heavy. "I thought I'd lose him, too." "You won't," Maybelle whispered. "The first year after she was gone," he continued, as if needing to purge the words, "I barely kept going. Some days, I'd ride out and just sit, staring at the mountains, thinking it would be so easy to just ride on, not come back. But then I'd think of Emma. She was just 5, and the baby. And the cattle needed feeding. The land doesn't care if you're grieving. The cows still need hay. The fences still need mending. The land, the cattle, the children, they kept me alive. They kept my hands busy until my heart remembered how to beat." Maybelle turned, wiping her hands on her apron. She saw the pain in his face, the raw memory of loss. It was a mirror of her own, and she wanted to look away, but she could not. "You've built a good life here, Mr. Morgan." "Cole," he said. "I think, after this, you should call me Cole." She nodded, unable to speak. The space between them was charged, a new and fragile intimacy that terrified her. She turned back to the sink, her heart hammering. A few nights later, the house was deep in sleep. The storm was long gone, leaving the world encased in a brilliant, frozen silence. Maybelle could not sleep. The lullaby had come to her. It was a tune she had buried, a simple melody from a music box. She had hummed it to Jacob while he was sick, the notes surfacing from a place she kept locked. "Now," it echoed in her head, refusing to leave. She rose from her narrow bed and padded out into the main room, wrapped in her shawl. The fire was banked low, just a bed of glowing red embers. She sat on the worn rug, staring into the heat, lost in the images the flames conjured. She began to hum, the sound barely audible, a soft, aching tune. She did not hear Cole approach. She only knew he was there when a heavy wool blanket was draped over her shoulders. She started, stifling a gasp. "You'll be cold," he said, his voice thick with sleep. He stood behind her. She pulled the blanket tighter, the scent of him, soap, wool, and pine smoke, enveloping her. "I couldn't sleep." "Me neither." He did not move away. He stood there, a large, warm presence at her back. She stared into the fire, and the quiet of the house, the shared warmth, the memory of nursing his son, it all conspired to break down her defenses. She was so tired, so very tired of being alone. Without thinking, she leaned back, just an inch. Her head came to rest against his leg. It was a small, unconscious gesture of surrender. He tensed. She could feel the muscle in his thigh harden. A brief, electric silence filled the room. It was loud, more powerful than any storm. It was the sound of two solitudes touching. Then, the horror of what she was doing struck her. The locket felt like it was burning a hole in her mattress. The smell of smoke filled her nostrils. She was leaning on this good man, this father, in this house full of children. She was a fraud. She was a whore. She was a killer. She pulled away as if she had been burned. She scrambled to her feet, the blanket falling to the floor. "Maybelle?" His voice was confused, concerned. "Don't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, don't." She fled to her room, slammed the door, and leaned against it, her heart pounding a sick rhythm against her ribs. She slid to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The lullaby was a mockery. The memory, held at bay for so long, crashed over her. She was not in Wyoming. She was in Kansas, 18 years old and working in the back rooms of the Red Garter Saloon. It was not a brothel, not officially, but everyone knew what Mrs. Abernathy provided. Maybelle had arrived there after her father died. With no skills and a pretty voice, she sang. She poured whiskey, and on nights when men with enough money insisted, she went upstairs. Then came Thomas. He was a ranch hand, broad-shouldered like Cole, but his eyes were laughing and restless. He told her she was too good for that place. He filled her head with promises of a small ranch in California, of orange trees and an ocean. He gave her a silver locket, and he gave her a child. He was long gone by the time Lily was born, abandoned. Maybelle had moved out of the saloon and into a small, clean room at Mrs. Pierce's boarding house, just down the street. She had her baby, a perfect, beautiful girl with a wisp of blonde hair, Lily. For 6 months, she knew a happiness so fierce it frightened her. She sang at the saloon at night, her voice richer now, and locked her baby girl safely in her room, praying every minute she was gone. Mrs. Pierce, a kind, deaf woman, kept a general eye on the second floor. It was a cold night in November. A cattle crew was in town, drinking hard. Maybelle was singing, her mind on the new dress she would buy for Lily with the extra tips. The first shout she heard was not fire, it was just a drunken yell. But then came the scream, then the smell, acrid, choking smoke. It was not the saloon. It was coming from outside. She ran. She pushed through the swinging doors, her thin velvet stage dress no protection against the night. The boarding house, 2 doors down, was an inferno. Flames licked out of the windows, reaching for the black sky. Her room, Lily's room. She ran toward it, screaming. Men grabbed her, holding her back as the front wall collapsed in a shower of sparks. She fought them, a wild animal, clawing and biting. She could hear nothing but the roar of the fire and the roar of her own blood. She broke free and ran for the back, for the alley, thinking of the other stairs. She was too late. The entire building was engulfed. She fell to her knees in the muddy alley, her throat raw, the name a silent shape on her lips. Her daughter, her baby, dead, because she was singing, because she was working in a saloon, entertaining drunken men, while her child burned. The fire had started in the room next to hers. A gambler, drunk, had knocked over a kerosene lamp. An accident, but it was no accident to Maybelle. It was a judgment. She was unworthy of love. She was unworthy of being a mother, and she had been punished. She stayed in Kansas long enough to bury the small, empty coffin. Then she ran from the name Maybelle Dawson, the singer who let her baby die. She ran until she ended in Wyoming, calling herself Miss Dawson, a respectable widow, a lie. A sharp, desperate neigh from outside shattered the memory. It was followed by the savage, snarling cry of wolves. Maybelle's head snapped up. The sound was close, too close. She heard Cole's feet hit the floor in the next room. She heard the scrape of his rifle being pulled from the wall rack. The front door burst open. "Papa?" Emma's frightened voice came from the darkness. "Stay inside. Emma, lock the door behind me," Cole roared. Maybelle ran to the window, rubbing the frost from the pane. In the brilliant, snow-bright moonlight, she saw it. 4 gray shadows circling a dark shape near the paddock. It was one of the horses, down, struggling in the deep snow. Cole was plunging through the drifts. Rifle raised, he fired. The shot was a flat crack in the frozen air. One of the wolves yelped and fell. The others scattered, vanishing like ghosts into the pine shadows. Maybelle pulled on her boots, her hands shaking from the memory, from the new fear. She grabbed the heavy bison hide and ran outside. Cole was kneeling by the horse, his rifle discarded in the snow. It was Bess, his main riding mare. Her flank was a dark, bloody ruin. "She's torn up bad," Cole said, his voice grim. He had his hands pressed against the worst of the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. "Silas is in the line cabin. Can't get here. I need your help." "What do I do?" "The barn. Get the lantern. And the medicine box. It's on the shelf by the tack room. And the coarse needle and thread. Hurry." She ran, her feet sinking deep, the cold air burning her lungs. She found everything, her hands moving with purpose. When she returned, Cole had managed to get the trembling, bleeding horse to her feet. He was half carrying, half dragging her toward the barn. "Hold the light," he grunted. Inside the barn, the air was warm and smelled of hay and manure. He eased the mare into an empty stall. Maybelle hung the lantern on a hook. The damage was horrific. The wolves had torn a deep gash along her flank and haunches. "Hold her head," Cole said. "Keep her calm. Talk to her." Maybelle moved to the mare's head, stroking the velvet nose, whispering nonsense, her voice trembling. "It's all right, girl. It's all right. You're safe now." For the next 2 hours, they worked. Cole was grimly focused, his face a mask in the lantern light. He cleaned the wounds with whiskey from a flask in the medicine box, the horse shuddering and blowing in pain. "Hold her! Hold her steady! Maybelle!" She pressed her body against the mare's neck, her own fear and grief replaced by the immediate, bloody task. Cole began to stitch. His large, rough hands were surprisingly deft. He worked with a farmer's practicality, pulling the torn flesh together, his brows knitted in concentration. They worked in silence, the only sounds the horse's pained breathing, the slick pull of the thread, and Cole's low, soothing murmurs. Maybelle's arms ached. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands and forearms smeared with dirt and dark, sticky blood. Finally, Cole tied the last knot and stepped back, his chest heaving. He smeared a thick layer of salve over the stitches. "She'll live," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "If the fever doesn't take her, she's a tough old girl." He leaned against the stall wall, wiping his bloody hands on a rag. Maybelle let go of the mare's head and sagged against the other side of the stall, her legs weak. They were enclosed in the small pool of yellow light, the rest of the barn in deep shadow. They were both filthy, exhausted, and emotionally raw. The adrenaline fled, leaving behind the memory of the fire, the shame, the kiss that almost was. It was too much. "I don't deserve this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Cole looked up, his face confusing exhaustion with concern. "What? The mare will be fine. You did good work." "No." Tears began to slide down her face, cutting clean tracks through the grime. "I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to help. I don't deserve happiness, not any—" She slid down the wall, burying her face in her bloody hands. "You should not have let me stay. I am not who you think I am." Cole pushed off the wall. He crossed the small space in one stride and knelt in the straw in front of her. He did not say anything. He did not offer platitudes. He just looked at her, his hazel eyes searching her face. Then, slowly, he reached out. He did not touch her shoulder. He did not pat her back. He cupped her face. His hands were large, calloused, and stained with the horse's blood. They were rough, but his touch was impossibly gentle. His thumbs moved, brushing the tears and the dirt from her cheeks. She stared at him, her breath catching in her throat, her body trembling. He leaned in. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of pity. It was not gentle. It was soft. Yes, but deep. It was a kiss of shared pain, of exhaustion, of a hunger that had been simmering since the day she arrived. It tasted of salt and metal and coffee. It was a kiss that acknowledged the darkness in her and was not afraid. She trembled, her hands coming up to grip his wrists, as if to push him away or to pull him closer. She did not know which, but then her lips parted, and she kissed him back. She kissed him with 2 years of stored-up loneliness, of guilt, of desperate, aching hunger. She kissed him like a drowning woman taking air. They stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling in the straw, in the lantern light, surrounded by the smell of hay and blood. Finally, he pulled back, just enough to look at her. They were both breathing hard, their breath pluming in the cold air. Her eyes were wide, frightened, and wanting. He rested his forehead against hers. "You deserve more than you believe," he whispered. The snow did not vanish overnight. It retreated, a slow, grudging surrender. First, the south-facing slopes of the valley turned from white to a deep, bruised brown. Then the sound of running water, A sound Maybelle had not heard in months became a constant music as the creek swelled. The air, once sharp and sterile with frost, turned heavy with the smell of wet earth, damp pine, and the sharp, green promise of new growth. Spring, in Wyoming, was not a gentle arrival. It was a muddy, chaotic, and forceful thaw, and as the land itself began to blemish and break, so too did the ice around Maybelle's heart. She had not run again. After the night in the barn, after Cole's words, a fragile, unspoken truce had settled between them. They did not speak of the kiss. They did not speak of the wolves, or the horse, or the ghosts that haunted the fireplace. Instead, they spoke of chores. But something was irrevocably altered. The brittle distance she had so carefully maintained was gone, replaced by an awareness so acute it was almost a physical ache. Life on the ranch expanded with the daylight. Silas, the hired hand, returned from the line cabin, and the work of the ranch began in earnest. Maybelle's days were filled with a rhythm that was, for the first time in her life, based on creation rather than survival. She learned the cadence of the days, rising in the dark to build the fire, the smell of coffee and bacon, the sound of Cole's boots on the porch, the slam of the door as he and Silas headed out. She found herself, to her own astonishment, singing. It started as a low hum while she kneaded bread, the same lullaby that had once brought her such pain. But now, in the warm, sunlit kitchen, it felt different. It felt like reclaiming something, not mourning it. Jacob heard her first. "That's a pretty song," he said, looking up from the wooden soldier Cole had carved for him. Maybelle's hands stilled in the dough. She looked at him, her heart catching. She managed a small smile. "It's just a tune." "Sing it loud," he demanded. And so, she did. Her voice, rusty from disuse, cracked at first, but then it strengthened, filling the small cabin. It was a simple song about a riverboat and a willow tree. When she finished, she found Emma standing in the doorway, her dark, serious eyes fixed on her. The girl said nothing, but she did not leave. She sat at the table and watched Maybelle work, a silent, watchful presence who was no longer just watching for flaws, but listening for the music. Her fragile joy was built of small, mundane moments. It was the surprising, earthy smell of the potato starts she planted in the small patch of turned earth Cole had fenced off for her. It was the deep, satisfied ache in her muscles after a day of helping Silas whitewash the chicken coop. It was the first time Emma slipped her small, cool hand into hers as they walked to the creek for water. But the greatest change was her laughter. It was Jacob who found it. He had been helping her hang the laundry, a task he despised, and had managed to fall face first into the muddiest part of the yard. He emerged, sputtering, covered from head to toe in thick, black gumbo, looking utterly betrayed. Maybelle had looked at him, at the sheer totality of his filth, and a sound had burst from her. It was not a giggle, or a polite chuckle. It was a full, unrestrained laugh that surprised her as much as it did him. Jacob, seeing her laugh, broke into a wide, gap-toothed grin, and then, with purpose, scooped up a handful of mud and threw it at the clean sheets. "Jacob Morgan!" she yelled, but she was still laughing. Cole, who had been mending a harness by the barn, stopped his work. He watched her. He watched this woman, who had arrived as a half-frozen shadow, now standing in the bright spring sunshine, her face alight with laughter, scolding his muddy, triumphant son. The sight of it settled something deep in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. But beneath the laughter and the shared work, the tension simmered. The kiss in the barn was a live coal. They were both terrified of fanning it into a flame, and just as terrified of it dying out. Their lives were a series of stolen glances and careful restraints. Their hands would brush as she passed him a plate, and they would both flinch, pulling back. He would watch her at supper, his gaze tracing the line of her neck as she leaned over to help Jacob cut his meat. She would watch him from the kitchen window, admiring the easy strength in his shoulders as he split firewood, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his forearms strong and dark. They longed for more. The house felt too small, the night air too charged. When they were the last two awake, stoking the fire or banking the embers, the silence was deafening. It was filled with the words they were not saying, the moves they were not making. They were building something, a life, a strange, patched-together family, and both were terrified of breaking it. For Cole, it was the fear of bringing another woman into his children's lives only to fail, to lose again. For Maybelle, it was the deeper, darker fear that if he truly knew her, if he saw the rot she carried inside, this fragile piece would shatter, and she would deserve it. So they hesitated, trapped between a desire that was as natural as the spring thaw and a fear that was as cold as the winter they had survived. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It had been a long, good day. Cole and Silas had spent it branding the new calves, and Maybelle had made a feast. Roast chicken, fresh bread, and an apple pie from the last of the winter preserves. They had eaten at the long table, a family. Jacob was loud. Emma was quiet but smiling. And Cole had looked at her, his eyes warm and appreciative, and said, "This was the best meal I've had in 3 years. Maybelle." He had used her name, not Miss Dawson. The sound of it, spoken in his low voice, was as intimate as a touch. Later, the house was still. Silas had retired to the bunkhouse. The children were fast asleep, worn out from the day. A soft rain had begun to fall, a gentle drumbeat on the roof. Maybelle finished cleaning the last pot and came into the main room, expecting to find it empty. Cole was there, by the fire. He was not resting. He was working, his brow furrowed in concentration. One of the kitchen chairs, the one Emma favored, was upside down on the floor. A leg had split. He had a piece of wood, a knife, and some glue. He was trying to carve a new support, his large hands moving with a frustrated clumsiness. She stood for a moment, just watching him, this big, capable man who could face down wolves and blizzards, was struggling with a simple piece of furniture. A wave of tenderness washed over her, so potent it stole her breath. She walked across the room and knelt on the rug beside him. He looked up, startled. The firelight played over his face, highlighting the weariness around his eyes. "You're holding the knife wrong," she said softly. He blinked. "What?" "You're cutting against the grain. You'll just split it again." She reached out, her hand hovering over his. "Here." She did not touch him. Not yet. He shifted, turning the piece of wood toward her. She pointed. "You have to shave it, like this, gently." He tried, but his grip was too tight. He huffed, a breath of frustration. Maybelle smiled, a small, private smile. She put her hand over his. His was large, rough, and warm. The knife was trapped between their palms. "Like this," she whispered. She guided his hand. The motion was slow, steady. The blade bit into the wood, shaving off a clean curl. They worked in silence. The only sounds, the scrape of the blade, the crackle of the fire, and the gentle patter of the rain. His hand turned under hers. The knife fell, forgotten, to the rug, his fingers interlaced with hers. They stopped. They looked at each other. The air was thick. The longing, so carefully banked for weeks, was suddenly roaring. The fear was still there, a cold shadow in the back of her mind, but the fire in front of them, the warmth of his skin, the safety she felt kneeling beside him, was stronger. He did not pull her. He did not command. He simply looked at her, his eyes asking a question she was finally ready to answer. She was the one who leaned in. She was the one who closed the last inch of space, her lips meeting his. This kiss was not the desperate, blood-soaked kiss in the barn. This was tender. It was a question, and an answer, and a promise. All at once. It was slow. It was deep. It was the taste of coffee and wood smoke, and a profound, bone-deep rightness. He brought his other hand up, cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. She leaned into his touch, a small sound, half sigh, half sob, escaping her. He gently pulled her from her knees, onto the rug, never breaking the kiss. He laid her down, his body a warm, heavy weight beside her. They moved with a slow, aching vulnerability. There was no rush. This was not about taking, it was about finding. He unlaced the high neck of her dress, his fingers brushing the skin of her throat. She shivered, but not from cold. She reached for the buttons of his shirt, her own hands trembling. They undressed each other in the warm, flickering light of the fire, their eyes never leaving each other's. When she lay bare before him, her old shame rose, a reflexive instinct to cover herself. He must have seen it in her eyes. He did not look at her with hunger, not yet. He looked at her with a reverence that undid her. He touched the old, faint scar on her shoulder, a relic from a drunken patron's bottle. He touched her hands, red and chapped from work. He touched her as if she were precious. And when he finally moved over her, when they finally joined, it was with a desperate, passionate need that had been building for months. It was the urgency of two people who had been starving. It was tender, it was rough, it was a validation, it was a refuge. Afterward, as the fire burned low, she lay curled against his side, his arm heavy and secure across her waist, and she began to cry. It was not the silent, racking sobs of the snowdrift. It was a quiet, weeping release. All the fear, all the loss, all the shame she had carried for so long, it all came pouring out, a cleansing rain. Cole just held her. He did not ask why. He did not tell her to stop. He held her tightly, stroking her hair, his lips against her temple. He let her cry until she was empty, until all that was left was a shuddering exhaustion. He pulled the heavy blanket from the back of his chair and covered them both. He tucked it around her shoulders, his movements sure and protective. He held her face, forcing her to look at him in the dim, glowing light. "You're safe now," he whispered. He said it like a vow. "You're safe." And in the circle of his arms, with the rain drumming on the roof, for the first time in 2 years, she believed it. The next morning, Maybelle woke to the unfamiliar warmth of Cole's bed. She had a dim memory of him carrying her, of protesting sleepily, of being laid down on the soft mattress. She was alone. The space beside her was cool, but the pillow still smelled of him. A fragile, terrifying happiness bloomed in her chest. She dressed slowly, her body aching in a new and pleasant way. She felt different. She felt seen. She opened the bedroom door, smoothing her hair, a small, shy smile on her face, and she froze. Agnes Plemon was standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed. She was not looking at Maybelle. She was looking at the rug, where the discarded chair, the knife, and 2 empty coffee mugs still sat. Her face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. The wagon. Maybelle hadn't heard the wagon. "So," Agnes said, her voice cutting through the morning stillness, "my brother finally soils his wife's bed." Maybelle's face burned. The blood drained from it just as quickly, leaving her cold. The shy smile vanished, replaced by the old, familiar mask of fear. "Agnes," she started, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Do not speak to me," Agnes snapped. "I knew it. The minute I saw you, I knew you were trouble. That false widow story, flimsy as a saloon curtain." She turned her sharp, spectacled gaze on Maybelle. "Where is he? Where is my brother?" "He's in the barn," Maybelle stammered. "Of course he is, fleeing, as he should be." Agnes took a step closer. I warned him. I told him you were a grasping, flighty thing. I told him he was letting a fox into the henhouse. And here's the proof. You, crawling from his bed. What did you promise him, girl? What did you do to make him forget his wife, his children? I didn't. Who are you? Agnes demanded, her voice rising. Who are you, really? Not some made-up Miss Dawson? What gutter did you crawl out of to come here and ruin a good man's home? The words were hammer blows, each one landing on Maybelle's deepest, most secret bruises. Ruin, gutter, false. Agnes, that is enough. Cole stood in the open doorway, his face dark with anger. He had clearly heard his sister's raised voice from the yard. He strode into the room, placing himself between Agnes and Maybelle. This is my home, Cole said, his voice a low growl. And Maybelle is a guest in it. You will not speak to her that way. A guest? Agnes laughed, a short, ugly sound. She is a guest who shares your bed. It seems... Have you lost your mind? Cole? What about Sarah? What about your children? Do you know anything about this woman you are defending? I know what I need to know, Cole said, his gaze fixed on his sister. I know she is kind. I know she is strong. I know she saved your nephew's life. That is more than enough. It is not enough, Agnes shrieked. She is a liar, and you are a fool. Get out, Cole said, his voice dangerously quiet. What? Get in your wagon, and you go back to town. You are not welcome here when you speak this way. Agnes stared at him, her mouth open, truly shocked. She looked past him at Maybelle, who was trembling. Her hands clenched so tightly, her nails were biting into her palms. The humiliation was a physical sickness. Agnes had voiced every terrible thing Maybelle believed about herself. She was ruining him. She was soiling his home. She was a lie. No, Maybelle whispered. Cole turned to her, his face softening instantly. Maybelle, it's all right. She's leaving. No. She backed away, her eyes wide with a building panic. She's right. She's right. She is not right. She is angry. She's right, Maybelle cried, the words tearing out of her. She couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in again, just as they had during the storm. But this was worse. This was the truth. She turned and ran, not to her room. She grabbed her thin shawl from its hook and burst out the front door. Running past the wagon, past the barn, she ran toward the creek, swollen with meltwater, her feet slipping in the mud. Maybelle! Cole bellowed, running after her. He caught her at the creek's edge. She was sobbing, her whole body shaking. He grabbed her arms. Listen to me, he commanded. What she said is not true. It is, she screamed, struggling against him. It's all true. Worse. It's all worse than she knows. I don't care what... You have to care. She beat her fists against his chest, her blows weak. You have to know. You have to hate me. Let me go. I will not let you go. He held her fast. She stopped struggling, her body going limp, her face crumpling. She looked up at him, her eyes a geography of pure, undiluted shame. My name is not Dawson, she whispered, the confession a torrent. It's Maybelle, just Maybelle. I was never married. I worked in a saloon in Kansas. The Red Garter. I sang, and I worked upstairs. I was a whore. Cole. He flinched. The word, said aloud, was a physical blow. His grip on her arms tightened, but he did not let go. I had a baby, she choked, the tears now flowing freely. A little girl, Lily. She was beautiful. She was perfect. And I left her. I left her alone in a room to go to work, to sing for drunken men. And there was a fire. The building burned down. She burned. I let my baby die. Cole, I killed her. She was sobbing hysterically now, her face buried in his shirt. I ran. I made up a name. I lied to you. I lied about everything. Agnes is right. I'm from the gutter. I'm poison. I'll ruin your family. I'll ruin your children. She sagged against him, her confession complete, empty. She waited. She waited for the disgust, for the revulsion, for him to push her away and tell her to leave. He was silent for a long time. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths. He was, as she had wanted, shaken. The reality of her words, the dead child, the brothel. It was more, and worse, than he had imagined. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. "You didn't kill her." "I did. I left her." "You left her to work, to feed her." He pulled back, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were not full of hate. They were full of a deep, aching pain. "That is not the same." "How can you say that?" "Because I know what it is to be alone and responsible for a life." He took a breath. "Maybelle." "I already knew." She stared at him. "What?" "I knew you were lying. Not all of it. Not the baby." His voice cracked on that word. "But I knew. The day after I hired you, I asked Agnes. She said your hands were too soft, that your story didn't fit. So when I went to town for supplies, I asked Mr. Gentry, I asked him what he thought." What did he say?" "He said you arrived with no money, looking terrified. He said you looked like a saloon girl running from trouble. I asked the sheriff. He said no one by the name of Dawson had come through, but a woman matching your description had bought a ticket north out of Kansas, and that there had been talk of a fire, a bad one." She was numb. You knew I was a lie, and you let me stay. You let me near your children." "I let you stay," he said, his voice firm, "because I saw you. I saw you get up every morning. I saw you scrub your hands raw. I saw you with Jacob when he was sick. I saw you stand your ground with Emma. I saw you laugh when he threw mud. What matters to me is not the woman who walked into Gentry's store. What matters is the woman who is standing here right now." He was offering her grace. He was offering her a truth she could not accept. His forgiveness was a kindness that felt like a hot brand. He might see who she was now, but she could only see what she had been. The smoke, the fire, the empty, charred locket. She shook her head, pulling out of his grasp. "You're a good man, Cole. That's the problem. You deserve better than me. You deserve a real wife, a whole woman. Not this." She turned her back on him. "Maybelle," he said. His voice pleaded. "I can't," she whispered, staring at the rushing, muddy water. "I can't be forgiven. I can't." He had offered her safety, and she had answered with the truth. And the truth, she knew, was a thing that would burn them all down. She did not pack. She did not take the small amount of money Cole had left on the dresser for her wages. She took nothing. She simply turned from him at the creek, her heart a dead, cold stone in her chest, and walked away. She walked past the barn, her eyes fixed on the muddy track that led to town. She could feel his gaze on her back, a physical weight. She heard him call her name, once more, a low, pleading sound that she ignored. Every step was a betrayal. She was betraying the children. She was betraying his kindness. But to stay, she felt, was the greater betrayal. To let them love a lie, a woman who was rotten from the inside out. When she passed the house, the door was open. She saw them. Jacob was at the table, a biscuit halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide and confused. Emma was standing by the porch rail, pale and still as a winter birch. She was watching, her dark, solemn eyes following Maybelle's every move. Maybelle's stomach clenched. She faltered, her step almost breaking. She wanted to run to them, to hold them, to tell them. What? The truth. She had no right. She turned her face away and kept walking. She heard Jacob's voice, high and thin. "Papa, where's she going? Is Miss Dawson leaving?" She did not hear Cole's reply. She walked faster, the mud sucking at her boots, her shawl clutched tight. She was running away, just as she had run from Kansas. But this time, she was not running from a fire. She was running from the one man who offered her warmth. Cole stood on the porch, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He watched her until she was just a small, dark figure disappearing over the first ridge. He felt Jacob tugging on his pants. "Papa, why did she go?" Cole put his hand on his son's head, his heart aching. She had to go to town for a while. Jacob, is she coming back?" Cole looked at Emma, who had not moved. Her face was white, her expression closed. She looked just as she had in the first year after Sarah died. A small, locked box. He had just gotten her back. Now, Maybelle had locked her up again. "I don't know, son," Cole said, his voice rough. He looked at the horizon. He wanted to go to his horse. He wanted to chase her down, throw her over the saddle, and bring her back. He wanted to shake her until she understood that her past did not matter. But he held himself still. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror. It was shame. Shame was not a chain another person could break. It was a captor that lived inside. He had given her his forgiveness, but she could not accept it. She had to find a way to forgive herself. Or she had to be cornered by her past so thoroughly that she had no choice but to fight it. Giving her space, he thought, was the hardest and only thing he could do. "Come inside," he said to the children, his voice flat. "Let's get breakfast." The walk to town took Maybelle 3 hours. The spring thaw had turned the wagon track into a river of cold. Thick mud that stole her energy and coated her hem in filth. She arrived in the small Wyoming town not as the respectable Miss Dawson, but as she truly was, exhausted, penniless, and covered in mud. She had no plan. She had no money for a room, no money for food. She had only the shame that propelled her. She walked the length of the main street, her head down, avoiding the few glances from the shopkeepers opening their doors. Mr. Gentry was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the mercantile. He saw her, and his broom stilled. He saw her muddy dress, her haunted eyes, her lack of a bag. He knew. He simply nodded, his expression one of pity, which was worse than scorn. She kept walking. She ended up where she always knew she would. At the end of the street, in front of the town's only saloon. The Gilded Cage. The paint was peeling, and even at 9 in the morning, the smell of stale beer and sawdust wafted from the swinging doors. She did not go in. She just stood across the street, staring at it. This was her world. This was where she belonged, not in a clean, warm ranch house with children and a good man. She was built for places like this, places where the light was dim and everyone was lying. She stood there for a long time, numb, as the town woke up around her. She was so lost in her own misery that she did not see the man exit the saloon. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit and a derby hat that looked out of place in this dusty town. He stood on the boardwalk, lighting a cigar, and his eyes scanned the street. They stopped. They narrowed. He smiled, a wide, predatory smile. He dropped the match and strode across the street, his polished boots ignoring the mud. Well, his voice cut through her fog. It was a voice she thought she would never hear again, a voice from her nightmares. "Maybelle Dawson, my star singer. I heard you'd flown north, but I didn't think I'd be lucky enough to find you waiting for me on a street corner." She snapped her head up. Her blood ran cold. It was him, Mr. Abernathy, the owner of the Red Garter in Kansas. He looked older, fuller in the face, but his eyes were the same, small, assessing, and cruel. What are you doing here?" she stammered, taking a step back. "Business, my dear, always business." He gestured to the Gilded Cage. "The owner here is an old friend. I'm arranging a new partnership, and what fortunate timing. I find myself in need of a new girl, and you find yourself, well, you look like you're in need of a job and a bath." He reached out and took her arm. his fingers digging in. "Come inside. We'll get you a drink. We can talk about your back pay. You left in such a hurry. Maybelle, you owe me for that." "I don't owe you anything," she hissed, trying to pull her arm free. His grip was like iron. "Don't you?" His charming smile vanished, replaced by the face she remembered. "You ran out, broke your contract. I had to hire a new singer. She's terrible, cost me a fortune. Let go of me." "You're coming with me," he said, his voice low and menacing. He began to pull her toward the saloon. "You'll work for me again. You'll pay back what you owe. A girl with your talents shouldn't be wandering in the mud."
"No, I won't!"
She planted her feet, pulling against him, her panic rising. He stopped, his face turning dark. "You think you have a choice. You think these good people," he sneered, looking around the quiet street, "know who you really are. I wonder what they'd think of the real Maybelle Dawson, the one from my saloon." "I don't care." "Oh, I think you do." He leaned in, his voice a poison whisper. "You're hiding. I can smell it on you. You're pretending to be someone else. Maybe a decent widow? That's the usual story. What happens when I tell the sheriff you're a fraud? What happens when I tell him about the fire?" Her breath hitched. "Yes," he breathed, seeing her terror. "I remember the fire. I remember the baby, a terrible tragedy. A mother, so desperate to sing in my saloon. She left her infant to burn to death. That's how I'll tell it. A baby killer. How do you think your new friends will like that?" She stared at him, her body frozen in horror. This was it, the public exposure, the final, damning truth. "You're coming with me," he said, his smile returning. He pulled her arm again. "We'll start you tonight." She was trapped. She had nowhere to run, no one to turn to. She had left the only person who would have defended her. The day at the ranch was the longest of Cole's life. The house was a tomb. Jacob was sullen and angry, refusing to eat. Emma had disappeared into her room and would not come out. Every sound was an echo. Every empty corner a reminder of Maybelle's laughter, her scent, her presence. By evening, Cole couldn't stand it. He had tried to give her space. He had told himself she needed to walk this path alone. But as he looked at his 2 grieving children, as he felt the crushing weight of the silence, he knew he was wrong. Shame was not a battle you won with solitude. It was a wolf, and you did not leave someone you loved to face a wolf alone. He found the small, worn shawl she had left behind, draped over the chair she'd been sitting in. He picked it up. It still smelled faintly of her, of soap and wood smoke. He was a fool. He was letting his own fear, his own pride, keep him here. He was afraid she would reject him again. But the thought of her, alone in town, with no money and that monster Abernathy lurking in her past. He strode to the children's room. "Emma, Jacob, I'm riding into town. I'm going to find her. I'm bringing her back." Jacob's head snapped up, his face alive with hope. "You are?" Emma, sitting on her bed, just watched him, her eyes dark. "I am." He turned to Silas, who was eating a cold supper at the table. "Watch them." Silas nodded. "Bring her home, boss." Cole didn't wait. He saddled his mare, the one Maybelle had helped him save. He rode hard, the setting sun at his back, the cool spring air tearing at his face. He was not giving her space. He was going to war. He arrived in town as the last light faded from the sky. The mercantile was closed. He checked the town's small boarding house. The proprietor hadn't seen her. His gut tightened. He walked to the one place left, the gilded cage. The tinny sound of a piano and raucous laughter spilled out. He pushed through the swinging doors. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. He scanned the room. He saw cattle hands, the town drunk, the saloon owner, but no Maybelle. His heart hammered. He turned to leave, and that's when he heard it. A man's angry voice, and a woman's terrified "No!" coming from the alley beside the saloon. He was out the door in a second, running for the alley. He rounded the corner into the darkness, and he saw them. Abernathy had her backed against the wall. He had her by the arms, his face close to hers, trying to drag her toward a carriage tied at the alley's end. "You're coming with me, Maybelle. One way or another. I don't care if I have to tie you up."
Let go of me!
She cried, struggling.
Let her go.
Cole's voice was not loud. It was deadly quiet. It cut through the night. Abernathy spun, his hand dropping to the pistol on his hip. Maybelle gasped, her eyes finding Cole in the darkness. "Cole," she breathed. "Who in the hell are you?" Abernathy sneered. "This your new protector, Maybelle? He looks a little rougher than your usual type." Cole did not speak. He did not move, except for one hand. He reached back to the horse he had left at the alley's mouth, his hand finding the rifle in its scabbard. He slid it free. The sound of him pulling back the hammer, the metallic click-clack, was the loudest sound in the world.
I said, let her go.
Abernathy's hands flew up, away from Maybelle. "Now, hold on. This is a private matter. This woman owes me money." The commotion, Abernathy's initial shout. Cole's arrival had drawn attention. The swinging doors of the saloon burst open. The owner, followed by a half-dozen patrons, spilled out onto the boardwalk, peering into the dark alley. "What's the trouble, Cole?" the sheriff called, pushing his way through. Abernathy saw his audience. He saw the sheriff's star. His demeanor changed instantly. He put his hands up, playing the victim. "Thank God, Sheriff, this man is threatening me. All I'm trying to do is reclaim my stolen property." "She's not property," Cole growled. "This woman," Abernathy said, his voice rising, projecting to the crowd, "is a fraud. Her name is Maybelle Dawson. She's a thief. She ran out on a contract, owes me hundreds. She came here, pretending to be some respectable widow. I'd wager." A murmur went through the crowd, ugly whispers. "Knew she was no good." "What's Cole Morgan doing with her?" "And that ain't the half of it," Abernathy yelled, sensing he had their attention. "She's not just a liar and a whore from my brothel in Kansas. She's a baby killer." The word hung in the air. Maybelle made a small, strangled sound, as if she'd been struck. She looked at the faces in the light, at their wide, horrified eyes. It was happening, her worst nightmare. She was exposed. One of the drunk cattle hands, a big man named Finch, pushed forward, a sloppy grin on his face. "A whore, you say, and a killer? Let's have a look at her." He lurched toward Maybelle, his hand outstretched, aiming to grab her. "Come on, girlie, don't be shy." Before his fingers could even brush her sleeve, Cole moved. He did not use the rifle. He dropped it. He took one smooth, fast step. His fist connected with Finch's jaw. It was not a barroom swing. It was a single, solid, weighted punch. The sound was a sickening thwack. Finch's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a sack of grain, out cold in the mud. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. They all stepped back. Cole stood over the fallen man, breathing hard. He slowly bent, picked up his rifle, and held it loosely. Barrel down, he stepped back, putting himself directly in front of Maybelle. He shielded her completely with his body. He turned his gaze, cold and hard, on the silent, watching crowd. "She's the woman raising my children." His voice was clear. It was not an apology. It was a statement of fact, a challenge. The crowd murmured. He saw Mr. Gentry, his face pale. He saw the sheriff, his hand on his gun, unsure. "And if any man here," Cole continued, his voice resonating in the alley, "has never made a mistake, speak now. If any one of you is clean enough to cast a stone, do it." He waited. Silence. The only sound was the piano music, still playing, forgotten, inside the saloon. No one moved. No one spoke. "Go on home," Cole said. his voice flat with dismissal. "The show is over." He turned his gaze on Abernathy. The man was pale, his bravado gone. "You get on your horse, ride out of this town, and if I ever see your face in this valley again, I will not be this patient." Abernathy, his eyes darting between Cole and the sheriff, nodded quickly. He backed away, retrieved his carriage, and scrambled away into the darkness. Cole didn't watch him go. He turned, his face still hard, and gently took Maybelle by the arm. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand. He led her to his horse, lifted her easily, and settled her side saddle. He swung up behind her, his body a solid wall at her back. He wrapped one strong arm around her waist, holding her securely against his chest, and kicked the horse into a walk, moving slowly, deliberately, through the crowd. They parted for him, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and confusion. He did not stop until they were clear of the town. The ride back to the ranch was dark, the only sound the steady hoofbeats of the mare and the rush of the creek beside the track. Maybelle was rigid in his arms for the first mile, a statue of pure, frozen shame. Then the tension broke. A single sob tore from her, then another. She did not cry hysterically. She wept with a deep, hopeless, ragged grief, turning her face into his chest, her hands gripping his shirt. He said nothing. He just held her tighter, his chin resting on the top of her head, and let her cry. He carried her into the dark, quiet house. He sat her on the rug in front of the cold fireplace, wrapped her in a heavy blanket, and built a new fire. He knelt beside her as the kindling caught, the flames casting flickering, warm light on her tear-stained, devastated face. She would not look at him. She stared into the fire, her body huddled inside the blanket. "Maybelle," he said softly. She flinched. "Stay," he said. She shook her head, a violent, small motion. "Stay here, with me, with the children, for good." She finally turned to look at him, her eyes wide and raw with pain. "How can you ask me that? After tonight, everyone knows. They all heard him. They all know what I am." Her voice broke. "I'll ruin you, Cole. They'll say you're a fool, living with a... She choked on the word. "They'll shun your children. They'll call them names. Because of me. Because of what I did. I can't do that to you. I won't." She was still trapped. Her guilt was a prison he could not breach. He opened his mouth, to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that he didn't care. But he heard it, a tiny shuffling sound. He looked up. Emma was standing in the dark hallway. She was a small, pale ghost in her white nightgown, clutching her cloth doll. Maybelle saw her and her breath hitched. She tried to wipe her face, to pull herself together. "Emma, honey, you should be in bed. It's late." Emma did not move. She just watched them, her dark, serious eyes moving from her father's face to Maybelle's. The silence stretched. Then the little girl moved. Her bare feet were silent on the wooden floor. She walked past her father. She walked directly to Maybelle, who was frozen, her hands clenched on the blanket. Emma stopped in front of her. She looked at Maybelle's wet face. Then she quietly crawled onto the rug and slipped under the edge of the blanket, pressing her small, cold body against Maybelle's side. Maybelle was rigid, her body thrumming with unworthiness. She was afraid to touch this clean, innocent child. Emma burrowed in, laying her head on Maybelle's chest. She wrapped her own small arms around Maybelle's waist, and she whispered, her voice small, but clear as a bell in the firelit room. "Please don't go again, Mama." The word, it was not an accident. It was not a mistake. It was a plea. It was a claim. It was an absolution more powerful than any a priest could offer. A sound tore from Maybelle's throat, a choked, broken thing that was half sob, half gasp. She looked at Cole over the top of Emma's head, her eyes wide, shattered, and filled with a dawning, terrified hope. Then she wrapped her arms around the little girl. She pulled Emma tight, as if she were a lifeline. Maybelle buried her face in Emma's dark, clean hair, and she broke. The final wall, the last defense, the granite core of her guilt and self-hatred. It crumbled to dust and washed away. She wept, holding the child who had just, in 4 small words, given her back her life. The shame did not evaporate in the firelight. It receded, like a tide going out, leaving behind a raw, scoured, and tender shoreline. When Maybelle woke, she was not in Cole's bed. She was on the rug, still wrapped in the blanket, with Emma's small, warm body nestled against her side. Cole was asleep in his chair, his head back, his rifle leaning against the wall. He had, she realized, watched over them all night. The house, in the pale dawn light, was quiet, but it was a different quiet. It was not the silence of ghosts and unspoken words. It was the silence of exhaustion, of a battle fought and, if not won, then at least survived. Emma's word, Mama, was a seed. It was a fragile, impossible thing, and Maybelle was terrified of crushing it, but she was more terrified of letting it wither. She began to believe it was not a sudden revelation. It was a slow, painful process, like a bone re-knitting. It happened in small moments. It happened when Jacob, who had heard Emma's plea, started calling her Mama too, his use of the name casual and bright. A simple statement of fact. She no longer froze. She would look at him, her heart clenching, and answer. She resumed her place, but she was no longer Miss Dawson, the hired help. She was Maybelle. She moved her few belongings from the small, cold room into Cole's. Not into his bed, not yet, but into his room. He had cleared 2 drawers in his heavy pine dresser for her. He did not ask. He simply did it. And she, in silence, accepted. The rhythm of the ranch was a balm. The simple, repetitive, honest work of it healed her. She taught Emma to sew. The girl's stitches, like her own had been, were crooked and clumsy. "It's hard," Emma whispered, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to mend a tear in Jacob's shirt. "All new things are hard," Maybelle said, her hand gently guiding the girls. "You just have to keep the needle straight. Look, 1 stitch at a time. See, you're mending it. You're making it whole again." Emma looked up at her, her dark, serious eyes holding a question. "Are you whole again, Mama?" Maybelle's breath caught. She looked at the small, torn piece of blue cloth. "I'm mending," she said softly. She sang to Jacob. The old lullabies, the ones she had buried with Lily, surfaced. At first, her voice was thin, a ghost of its former self. But the children's easy acceptance gave it strength. She sang the riverboat song, and the one about the firefly, and Jacob would fall asleep, his hand curled in hers. Cole would often stand in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, just listening. He never spoke of it, but his presence was a steady, warm pressure at her back. She cooked side by side with him. He was a clumsy presence in her kitchen, but he was a willing one. They would peel potatoes in companionable silence, their hands moving in a shared rhythm. They were a partnership. They were building a life. 1 meal, 1 mended shirt, 1 day at a time. Cole gave her space. He understood, perhaps better than she did, that the wounds she carried were deep. He did not press her. He did not demand the physical intimacy they had shared. He offered, instead, a relentless, quiet devotion that was more powerful than any passion. He would bring her a cup of coffee in the morning, his fingers brushing hers. He would touch the small of her back as he passed her. He made his intentions clear in 1,000 small, unspoken ways. He wanted her. He wanted this. He wanted her for good. But his patience had its limits. It was not her he was impatient with. It was the ghost. It was the shadow of her past that she still allowed to sit at their table. He would find her, late at night, standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale in the moonlight. He knew she was back in Kansas, back in the smoke. One night, he found her like that, rigid with a memory. He came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. She flinched, a sharp, violent movement. He did not let go. His grip tightened.
He's gone. Maybelle.
I know. Then why are you still letting him haunt you? Why are you still punishing yourself?
I am not,
She whispered, defensive.
Are you not?
His voice was low, rough with a frustration he could no longer hide.
You are here. You are safe. The children love you. I love you.
It was the first time he had said it aloud. The words hung in the dark, silent room. She turned, her eyes wide, full of tears.
I am here,
he said, his hands moving to cup her face.
I am not going anywhere. I have chosen you, but you have to choose. Maybelle, you have to choose to be here.
All of you. Not just the part that is Mama, or the part that is the housekeeper. I want all of you. I am tired of sharing you with a ghost. He did not kiss her. He let her go and turned, leaving her alone by the window. His words were a challenge. She could have his love, his life, his family, but she had to claim it. She had to stop being a victim of her past and choose to be the master of her future. The tension simmered for days. The air in the small cabin was thick with unspoken need. With his challenge and her hesitation, she was terrified. To choose happiness felt like a betrayal of her lost child. To accept this love felt like a sin she had not atoned for. But to reject it was to die. And she had been dead for 2 years. She found her answer on a hot, heavy afternoon in early summer. The air was still, promising a thunderstorm. Cole was in the barn. She had watched him from the kitchen, his movements sharp and angry as he mended a piece of tack. He was frustrated with her, with the limbo she was keeping them in. She dried her hands on her apron. She looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror by the door. She saw the weariness in her own eyes. She was tired. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of being cold. She had been given a second chance, a miracle, and she was letting it slip through her fingers because she still believed she was unworthy. Emma's voice came to her.
Are you whole again?
Cole's voice came to her.
I want all of you.
She untied her apron and let it fall to the floor. She walked out of the house, her steps purposeful, and crossed the sunny, dusty yard to the cool darkness of the barn. He was there, currying Bess, his back to her. He had taken off his shirt in the heat. His back was broad, the muscles moving under his skin.
Cole,
she said. He stopped, his hand stilling on the mare. He turned slowly. He looked tired. He looked wary. He was expecting another argument, another night of her pulling away. She did not give him the chance. She walked across the straw-strewn floor. Her eyes locked on his. She did not stop until she was standing directly in front of him, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He said her name, a question. Maybelle? She did not speak. She reached up, fisted her hands in the rough denim of his overalls, and pulled his face down to hers. She kissed him. It was not the tender, discovering kiss by the fire. It was not the desperate, pained kiss in the barn. This was a kiss of decision. It was fierce and deep and hungry. It was a claim. She poured all of her resolve, all of her fear, and all of her hope into it. She was answering his challenge. She pulled back, just enough to breathe, her forehead resting against his. His eyes were wide, surprised, and blazing.
I want to be yours,
she whispered, her voice shaking but strong. Not the ghost, not the singer, not the woman from Kansas. Me, Maybelle. I want to be yours, if you'll still have me. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He simply crushed her to him, his mouth finding hers again. He lifted her off her feet. his arms like steel bands, and carried her to the hayloft, the scent of cured grass and old wood surrounding them. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no vulnerability. This was urgency. This was need. This was two people, changed by their shared past, finally, fully, claiming their future. They made love with a raw, desperate passion, a confirmation of a promise wordlessly made and finally sealed. It was not a beginning. It was a consummation of a life that had already begun. They lay in the hay, their bodies damp, the late afternoon light filtering through the slats in the barn wall. He was holding her, his heart still hammering against her back. "I'm not letting you go," he murmured into her hair. "Ever." "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and she meant it. They were a family. The pretense was gone. Maybelle and Cole were man and wife in all but name, sharing a bed, a life, and the raising of their children. The summer settled around them, warm and golden. For the first time, Maybelle felt a sense of peace so profound it almost frightened her. The past, however, was not as dead as she had hoped. It arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a nervous young deputy from town. He rode up to the ranch, his horse sweating, and dismounted, twisting his hat in his hands. "Mr. Morgan, ma'am." He nodded at Maybelle, his eyes refusing to meet hers. "What is it, Ben?" Cole asked, stepping off the porch, his face immediately wary. The deputy pulled a folded telegram and a more formal document from his saddlebag. I'm sorry about this. Cole, a telegram came in from a judge in Kansas." It was followed by a formal complaint. Maybelle felt the blood drain from her face. She stepped down to stand beside Cole, her hand finding his. "Complaint?" Cole's voice was low. "From a Mr. Abernathy." The deputy looked down. "He's filed formal charges, theft of property. He claims you stole a velvet dress and a silver locket." "Ma'am." He finally looked at her, his face full of pity. "And fraud, for using a false name. Miss Dawson, to get your job here." The locket. He had named the locket, the one thing she had left of Lily. He was reaching into her past to poison her future. "Sheriff Davies needs to see you, ma'am," Ben said, his voice low. "Judge Miller is with him. They're asking you to ride to town, to answer the charges." "That's nonsense," Cole said, his voice a low growl. "This is just revenge. That man is a liar." "I have to go," Maybelle said. Cole turned to her. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. The old, hunted terror was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I'm not running again. Cole," she said. "I won't let him haunt us. I have to end this." "Then I'm coming with you." They did not speak on the ride to town. Maybelle rode Bess, her back straight. She was not a fugitive. She was a woman riding to face an accuser, with the man she loved at her side. The sheriff's office was hot and cramped. Judge Miller, a stern-faced man with wire-rimmed spectacles, sat behind the sheriff's desk. Sheriff Davies stood by the window, his arms crossed. Abernathy was not there, but his sworn, notarized statement lay on the desk. "Ma'am," the judge said, not unkindly, "these are serious accusations. They carry jail time. If true, what do you have to say?" Cole started to speak, his voice tight with anger. "Judge, this is a joke. That man threatened her." "Mr. Morgan, I appreciate your loyalty, but I need to hear from her. Let her speak." Maybelle took a step forward. She looked at the judge, her hands clasped in front of her. "My name is Maybelle," she said, her voice clear in the small room. "I never used the name Dawson until I came to Wyoming. That part is true. I did work for Mr. Abernathy in his saloon. That is also true." Judge Miller raised an eyebrow. "And the theft, ma'am? The dress and the locket?" "The dress was my own, Your Honor,
paid for with my wages. The locket." Her voice cracked. Just once, but she did not falter. "The locket was a gift. It held the only picture I had of my daughter."
"I see."
The judge steepled his fingers. "And the fraud? You deceived Mr. Morgan."
"I did,"
Maybelle said.
"I was desperate. I was running from Mr. Abernathy. He was not a good man. He threatened me. He tried to force me back into his employ. By force. That is why I ran. That is why I lied. I wanted a clean life. A new start." She looked at Cole. "I did not defraud Mr. Morgan. I told him the truth soon after I arrived. He knew I was lying, and he gave me a chance anyway."
Judge Miller turned his gaze on Cole.
"Is this true,
Morgan? You hired this woman, knowing she was living under a false name?"
"I hired her," Cole said, his voice resonating with conviction, "because I saw a woman in desperate trouble, and she has been the finest, hardest working, and most decent person I have ever had on my ranch. She saved my son's life. Whatever she was in Kansas, here in Wyoming, she is a better citizen than most."
The judge was silent, considering. "A fine testament, Cole, but the law is the law. A sworn statement."
"Judge Miller?"
The voice came from the open doorway. Mr. Gentry, the mercantile owner, was standing there, his hat in his hands. "Gentry, this is a formal hearing," the sheriff said. "I know, but I have a piece of this." Gentry stepped inside. "I was there, Judge, the night Cole had that fight. I was on the boardwalk. I heard that Kansas fella, Abernathy. He was threatening her. He called her foul names. He was trying to drag her into a carriage. Cole was just protecting her. That man wanted revenge, not justice." "Is that so?" the judge said, his eyes sharpening.
"It is."
A new voice, Mrs. Gable, the school teacher, pushed past Mr. Gentry. She was a prim, severe woman, and she looked nervous but determined. "Your Honor, I must speak. I don't know about Kansas, but I know about Emma Morgan." All eyes turned to her.
"That child," Mrs. Gable said, "has been my student for 3 years, for 2 of them. She was a ghost. She never spoke. She never smiled. I thought she was lost. Since this woman, Maybelle, has been at the ranch, Emma talks. She plays. Last week, she handed me a drawing of a horse, and she smiled at me. That is not the work of a criminal. That is the work of a mother." Maybelle felt tears well, but she blinked them back.
"Judge!"
A third voice. It was Mrs. Davies, the sheriff's wife, standing at the back. "I saw it too. I saw that drunkard try to grab her. I saw her face. She was terrified. And I saw Cole Morgan stand up for her. This town has been whispering for weeks. But what I see is a woman who has more than earned her place. That man from Kansas, filing these charges from 500 miles away. It smells like spite, not law." The judge looked at the faces in his office. The grocer, the school teacher, the sheriff's own wife. He looked at Cole Morgan, solid as the mountains. Then he looked at Maybelle. He saw her steady gaze, her unashamed honesty. He picked up Abernathy's sworn statement. He read it one more time. Then, with a decisive rip, he tore it in half and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. "Mr. Abernathy is not present," the judge declared, his voice final. "His claims are uncorroborated, and the testimony of our own most respected citizens seems to contradict his accusations of fraud. As for a personal dispute over a dress and a locket in another territory, this court has neither the time nor the inclination to pursue it. Charges are dropped. You are free to go, ma'am." Maybelle's knees buckled. Cole's hand was there, on her back, holding her steady. She turned, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning relief. They walked out of the hot, cramped office into the bright, dusty street. Mrs. Gable, Mr. Gentry, and Mrs.
Davies were waiting. They didn't whisper. They didn't stare. They smiled. Mrs. Gable reached out and patted Maybelle's arm. "Good day, Maybelle," she said, and her use of the name was a benediction. "I expect to see you at the school's summer picnic." "Yes, ma'am," Maybelle whispered. "Thank you." They were left alone, standing in the middle of the main street, their horses waiting patiently. She was no longer an outcast. She was a citizen. She was Maybelle. She turned to Cole, her eyes shining with tears she no longer had to fight. I don't know what to say, Cole. You don't have to say anything," he said. He took both of her chapped hands in his. He looked at her, his hazel eyes clear and bright, filled with a love so deep and steady it took her breath away. "They see you now, Maybelle, the way I see you." He did not let go of her hands. "I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of you being anything but my wife," she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but he held her other hand fast. "I'm not a fancy man. Maybelle, I can't offer you silks or a big house back east. I can offer you this ranch, a lot of hard work, a life that will be difficult, 2 stubborn children, and all of me, for as long as I'm breathing." He squeezed her hand. "I want to make this real, in front of God, and this town, and anyone who wants to watch. I want you to be Mrs. Morgan." He smiled, a small, rough smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "The kids already call you Mama. I just want to make it true." She was crying openly now, but for the first time in her life, the tears were not from pain or loss or shame. They were from a joy so bright and fierce it felt like the sun. "Yes," she whispered, the word lost in a sob. She cleared her throat and said it again, loud enough for him, for the town, for the whole world to hear. "Yes, yes, Cole, yes." He pulled her to him, right there in the dusty street under the wide Wyoming sky. He kissed her, a long, deep, and public kiss. It was not a kiss of passion or of comfort. It was a kiss of promise. It was the seal on their new, true life. They were married 3 weeks later, not in a church, but on the porch of the ranch house, under a wide, cloudless August sky. The wedding was as modest as their life, witnessed by the valley itself and the few people who had become their anchors. Silas stood beside Cole, his hat held awkwardly in his hands, his face scrubbed clean. Mr. Gentry had closed the mercantile for 2 hours to be there, and he brought his wife, Mrs. Gable, the school teacher, arrived in the same wagon, along with Sheriff Davies and his wife, who had insisted on baking a small, dense cake. Maybelle had made her own dress. She had taken one of Sarah's old ones from a trunk, a deep blue calico, and remade it. It was simple, high-necked, and fit her perfectly. She had woven wildflowers from the creek bank into her hair, bluebells and yellow asters. Cole stood waiting, his broad shoulders squared in his one good suit, his face unreadable but for the burning intensity in his eyes. He watched her walk onto the porch, and his breath hitched. Judge Miller, who had agreed to officiate, cleared his throat. Emma, her face a mask of profound seriousness, walked between them. She was not carrying rings on a pillow. She carried them in her palm, held out flat as if presenting a rare and fragile specimen. She walked first to Maybelle, who took the thin gold band. Then she walked to her father, who took the matching, wider band. Then she stepped back, her duty done, and stood by Jacob, placing a firm hand on his shoulder to keep him from fidgeting. Maybelle's hands trembled. She could feel the slight tremor as she held Cole's large, rough hand. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of the judge's voice and the solid, warm presence of the man in front of her. When it was his turn to speak, Cole did not look at the judge. He looked only at Maybelle. Cole, he said, his voice a low rumble. Take you, Maybelle, to be my wife. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his thumb brushing her knuckles. I will be your shield. I will be your home. I will honor you, and I will protect you with my life and with all that I am, for as long as we both shall live." He spoke the vow as if it were a physical thing, a barrier he was building around her with his words. When it was her turn, her voice was a whisper, but it was clear. "I, Maybelle, take you, Cole, to be my husband." Her hand steadied as she slid the ring onto his finger. "I will be your partner. I will be your comfort. I will honor you, and I will cherish this life with all that I am, for as long as we both shall live." The judge pronounced them man and wife. Cole did not wait for permission. He gathered her in his arms, his hand tangling in her hair, and kissed her. It was not the chaste kiss of a public ceremony. It was a kiss of possession, of relief, of profound, unshakable promise, sealing their vow in front of the mountains and their friends. Jacob whooped, and Silas clapped, and for the first time, Maybelle Morgan smiled, a wide, true smile that reached her eyes and banished the last of the shadows. Life settled. It became what she had never known, stable. The rhythm of the seasons took over. The late summer harvest was rich. The autumn air turned crisp, painting the aspens on the high ridges a brilliant, fiery yellow. The work was hard, but it was shared. She and Cole were a true partnership, moving with an easy, unspoken understanding. He was the strength of the ranch. She was its heart. The first snows of winter came, and with them, a new secret. Maybelle knew before the doctor confirmed it. She was pregnant. She told Cole one night as they sat by the fire, the children asleep. He had been oiling a bridle, his hands moving with practiced ease. She just said the words, quietly, "I'm carrying a child, Cole." His hands stilled. The leather fell to his lap. He looked at her, his face slowly breaking into a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy that it took her breath away. He crossed the rug in one movement, knelt before her, and laid his hand on her still flat stomach, his rough palm a brand of warmth against her dress. "A baby," he whispered. He rested his forehead against her knees. "Our baby." His joy was a bright, hot sun, but for Maybelle, it cast a cold shadow. As her body changed, as the life inside her grew, the old fear returned. It was a creeping, icy dread that she fought to hide. She glowed with quiet happiness, for Cole, for the children. But at night, in the dark, she would lie awake, her hand on her swelling belly, and the smell of smoke would fill her nostrils. She remembered the weight of Lily in her arms. She remembered the fierce, terrifying love. She remembered the empty coffin. What if she was not meant for this? What if she was being given this gift only so it could be torn away again? What if she failed this child, too? She was terrified of losing another baby. Cole was not a fool. He saw the shadow in her eyes. He felt her stiffen in the night. He saw her stand over Jacob's bed, just watching him breathe, her face tight with an anxiety that was more than just motherly concern. He did not fight her fear with words. He fought it with action. He began to spend his evenings not on tack, but on a new project. He brought pieces of clear, smooth pine into the house. He would sit by the fire, the scent of the wood shavings filling the room. He was building a crib. He built it with the same steady, practical hands that had stitched his mare, that had punched a drunkard, that had held her as she wept. He built it to be solid. He built it to last. It was a fortress of wood, a physical manifestation of his promise. One evening, when he was nearly finished, Maybelle was sitting across from him, mending one of Emma's dresses. She was watching his hands as he sanded the last rough edge. She put her sewing down. "Cole." He looked up. "I still have it," she whispered. "The locket." He nodded. His hands still... He knew what she was asking. He knew what she was confessing. The ghost was still in the room. "Where is it?" he asked. "In my drawer, at the bottom, wrapped in cloth." He put the sandpaper down. He stood, went to the dresser, and opened her drawer. He found the small bundle and brought it back to the firelight. He unwrapped it. The silver locket, blackened and warped, lay in his palm. He looked at it for a long, silent moment. He saw the scorched metal, the bubbled engraving. He saw the source of her pain. He did not throw it in the fire. He did not put it back in the drawer. He stood, walked to his workbench in the corner, and returned with a small, square frame he had made from the same pine as the crib. It had a pane of glass and a solid wooden back. He gently opened the locket. He looked at the charred, unrecognizable smear of the photo. He looked at the tiny, perfect lock of pale blonde hair. Then, with a tenderness that made Maybelle's throat ache, he laid the open locket inside the frame. He pressed it against the wood backing, the lock of hair and the black smear side by side. He sealed it under the glass. He hammered 2 small nails into the back, sealing it shut forever. He had not destroyed the memory. He had not erased her past. He had encased it. He had taken the ghost that haunted her and given it a place, a boundary. He had made it a memory, a part of their story, no longer a phantom to fear. He walked to the new, finished crib. He hung the small, sealed frame on the inside of the headboard, a silent, wooden guardian. "She is part of this family, too," Cole said, his voice rough. "She will watch over her new brother, or sister." He turned to Maybelle. "You will not lose this child. I will not let you." She crossed the room, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. The taste of salt and pine on their lips. The fear was not gone, but it no longer had power. The final threat came as the winter was loosening its grip. A wet snow was falling, heavy and thick, melting as it hit the muddy ground. The children were inside, playing by the fire. Maybelle, heavy with child, was watching them from the kitchen, a pot of stew simmering. Cole and Silas were in the barn, assessing the winter's damage to the roof. The sound of horses was what alerted her. It was too many horses, and they were coming too fast. She moved to the window, wiping the steam from the pane. Her heart stopped. It was not a neighbor. It was 4 men. They were hard-looking, dressed in trail-worn clothes, and they were heavily armed. And at their lead, his derby hat soaked, his face twisted in a mask of pure malice, was Abernathy. "Cole!" she screamed, her voice a raw sound of terror. "Cole!" She ran to the door, grabbing the rifle from the wall rack, the one Cole kept loaded. "Emma! Jacob! Get under the bed, now! Do not come out until I say!" The children, seeing the look on her face, scrambled to obey. Abernathy saw her in the doorway. He reined in, his horse churning the mud, and he smiled. Well, Maybelle, you look full. It seems I got here just in time for the celebration." "Get off this land!" Maybelle shouted, her voice trembling as she raised the heavy rifle, the stock unsteady against her shoulder. "Oh, I'm not here for you, you filthy whore!" Abernathy sneered. "Though I will be happy to take my payment from your hide, I'm here for him, the rancher who put his hands on me. He owes me compensation and revenge." The barn door burst open. Cole and Silas ran out, unarmed, having heard her scream. They stopped cold, seeing the 4 men, seeing the rifles pointed at them. "Abernathy," Cole said, his voice flat and deadly. He spread his hands, showing they were empty. "Mr. Morgan," Abernathy said with a mock bow, "you cost me a great deal of trouble, and you cost me a great deal of money. You and your new friends in town. I'm here to collect $500, or I'll take it in stock, and in blood." "You'll get nothing here," Cole said. "Turn around and ride out." "I don't think so." Abernathy's smile faded. He raised his pistol. "I think I'll start by taking that wife of yours. Then I'll burn this place to the ground, just like her last home." He was baiting Cole. He was trying to make him move, and it worked. Cole saw the pistol level, not at him, but at Maybelle on the porch. He roared, a wordless sound of pure rage, and he lunged. Not at Abernathy, but for the house, for the door, to protect his family. "Cole, no!" Maybelle screamed. It was what Abernathy wanted. "Kill him," he ordered. The two hired men raised their rifles. Cole was a large target, running across the open, muddy ground. The shots cracked, one after another. Cole staggered. He looked down at his chest, a dark stain spreading on his shirt. He looked up at Maybelle, his face a mask of shock and pain. He fell to his knees, then pitched forward into the mud. "No!" Maybelle screamed. The sound was not human. It was the shriek of an animal, a sound of such profound, primal loss that it made the horses shy. Silas, seeing his boss fall, made a desperate run for the woodpile, for the axe. One of the gunmen turned and shot him in the leg. Silas went down, crying out, and crawled behind the trough. Abernathy laughed, a high, ugly sound. "Well, that was easy. Now, Maybelle, it's just you and me." He started to dismount. Something in Maybelle broke. The woman who had cried in the snow, the woman who had feared a memory, the woman who had trembled at her own wedding, was gone. She was fierce. She was wild. She was a mother protecting her young. She raised the rifle. Her hands were no longer shaking. She was steady as stone. The terror was gone, replaced by an ice-cold rage. She did not aim for Abernathy. She aimed for the man closest to him, the one who had just reloaded. She pulled the trigger. The rifle's kick slammed into her shoulder, but her aim was true. The man cried out, clutching his arm, and his rifle fell. "What?" Abernathy yelled, his foot halfway out of the stirrup. Maybelle worked the lever, the metallic shuck-shuck a promise. She fired again. She missed the man, but the bullet tore through his horse's saddle, and the animal screamed, rearing and bucking. The third man, seeing his companions hit and panicked, had no stomach for this. This was not what he was paid for. He was not being paid to fight a pregnant, wild-eyed woman who could shoot. He turned his horse and fled, galloping back down the track. The man with the wounded arm was scrambling onto his panicked horse. "She's crazy! Abe, I'm leaving!" He wheeled his mount and followed his friend. It was just Abernathy. He was staring at her, his face pale with shock and fury. He was half on, half off his horse. He looked at Cole, lying motionless in the mud. He looked at Silas, wounded by the trough. Then he looked at Maybelle, who was calmly, steadily, working the lever again, chambering another round. She leveled the rifle, the dark, round hole of the barrel aimed directly at his heart. He saw in her eyes that she would not miss. He scrambled back into his saddle, yanking his horse's head around. "This isn't over, you bitch!" he screamed. "It is," she said, her voice a low rasp. She fired. The bullet missed him, but it was close enough to make him shriek. He kicked his horse into a desperate, muddy gallop and fled, disappearing over the ridge, chasing his hired cowards. The silence that fell was absolute. It was broken only by the sound of the wet snow and Silas, groaning by the water trough. Maybelle dropped the rifle. She put her hand on her belly, on the child that had kicked with the force of the gunfire. Then she ran as fast as she could, plunging off the porch into the mud. She fell to her knees beside Cole. Cole, please!" She turned him over. His face was pale, his eyes closed. The front of his shirt was a mass of dark, wet blood. But he was breathing. It was shallow, but it was there. "You're safe," she whispered, her tears falling, washing the mud from his face. "You're safe now." Cole survived. The bullet had entered high, in his shoulder, tearing through muscle but missing his heart. He was unconscious for 2 days, in the grip of a fever. Maybelle did not leave his side. She cleaned the wound. She stitched it closed herself, her hands as steady as they had been with the rifle. She nursed him, just as she had nursed his son. Silas's leg was broken, but he would heal. The family recovered, as Cole slowly regained his strength, as the winter finally gave way to a true, green spring. The last of the shadows fled the ranch. The final threat had been met. The past was not just sealed, it was defeated. Maybelle sang the lullabies again. She sat in the rocking chair Cole had built, her own newborn daughter in her arms, a perfect, healthy child with her father's warm hazel eyes. She sang the song of the riverboat, and she sang the song of the firefly, and her voice was rich and clear. There was no pain in it. There was no memory of smoke. There was only the music. One evening, months later, Maybelle was tucking the children into bed. Jacob was already half asleep. Emma, however, was wide awake, her dark eyes watching her mother in the lamplight. "Mama," she whispered. "Yes, my love." "Tell us the story again. Tell us the story of the firefly light." Maybelle smiled. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand smoothing Emma's hair. "All right." She began to speak. It was the story she had created for them, for her, for the memory of the daughter she had lost. It was not a story of fire and death. It was a story of a tiny, bright soul, too bright for the earth, who had become a star, a firefly, that came to sit on her windowsill at night to watch over her new brother and sister. This time, as she told it, there were no tears. Her voice was soft and full of peace. She did not know that Cole was standing in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his shoulders still stiff, watching his family. He watched his wife, her face serene, her voice a gentle comfort. He watched his daughter, her eyes closing in trust, and his son, already asleep. He looked at the small, framed locket that now hung above the fireplace, a part of their home. He looked at his wife, the woman who had faced down her own ghosts and his enemies. He whispered, his voice so low it was only for himself and the quiet, loving room. "You said you couldn't be a mother, but they've already chosen you. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please, drop a comment and let us know. Your thoughts mean the world to us, so feel free to share them in English. And if you loved this story, please consider subscribing to From Wild West so you never miss a new adventure.